No matter what's going on in the world or what time period we in, we need to know what Ja Rule thinks about current events. We'll get into why I say this later on in the video, but for now, let's get into episode 4. This one is called Day 1. So we rewind back to 2018, and it's a bunch of federal guys rolling in a patrol truck, and one of the soldiers is telling a story about a violent interaction with the voters. He kept saying voters. I wasn't really sure what that meant, but then one of the guys was like, why do you keep calling the citizens voters? And the guy that was telling the story didn't even know why he was calling them voters. But then the sergeant, known as Isaac, was like, hey, big dog, we took away their rights to vote, and then someone thought it would be funny to mock them by calling them voters. Now, see, this is why feds been getting effed up out in these streets. Y'all out here being all inhumane, and then you done caught a fade. Got these hands, feet, knives, and bullets put on you. So then the driver alerted the sergeant and said, hey, look, we being blocked by this big school bus up here. And then they looked back and saw all these people standing in the streets behind the vehicle. And then Sarge said, you know what? I'm going to go out here and talk to these people alone. But then he decided to take the little questioning soldier out there with him. He said, you can learn something real quick. Come on. So they get out the truck and they walk over to the people, and a woman walks up to Isaac and she says, you Isaac? He was like, yeah. And Isaac was like, you Hanrahan? And she was like, yep. So he walks back over to the federal truck, pulls the clips out of some of his grenades, tosses them in the back with the dudes, and just closes the door. Kills everybody in the back. Then the driver pops out and he takes him out too. Then he walks back over to Hammerman and she says, welcome to the fight. Then the questioning soldier didn't know what to do. He was like, should I shoot you? And Isaac said, make your choice. So then you fast forward 11 years later and you see Ellie and Dina rummaging through a store. And Ellie didn't really find much on her end, but Dina was getting ready to leave and then she found something. Didn't show what it was, but she said she had to pee. And my first thought was a very correct thought, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So the next scene, they're kind of walking around in confusion because they thought Seattle would have been destroyed, but it wasn't. It was just overgrown and abandoned. And at this point, they're walking through what seems to be the neighborhood of Seattle because they're walking around and they see all these rainbows and they see even a heart with pride written in it. And Ellie was like, what's with all these rainbows? I guess they were real optimistic out here. And it's really funny because both of them are Ligga Bigga Tigga, but neither one of them were alive when pride celebrations were a thing, so they have no clue what this is. So they're walking through the area, and Dina looks through her binoculars and sees wolf spray painted on one of the satellites atop one of those really tall buildings. And then Elle was ready to go right then, but Dina put things into perspective. She was like, they're on a hill, so that means they'll see us coming, especially in broad daylight and on shimmer. So they decided to go on foot at nightfall. And if we're being honest, Elle would have been dead real fast had Dina not shown up because she's way more strategic and prepared. So to kill time, they decided to check out some of these vacated stores. So they went ahead and parked Shimmer over here by some food, which I appreciate the fact that they feed these horses so well. They always put them next to some food. I'm like, yes, please treat them right. And it just so happened that they were in one of my favorite places to go, the record store. So they get in there and my eyes travel directly to the vinyls and I see some familiar covers. Now, my ADD in this situation has me thinking that the writers were trying to send subliminal messages to Ellie. One of the records was the last Aaliyah album before she died. You know what the first track on that album was? We need a resolution. We need a resolution. They saying you need to solve your problems in a different way, sis, because killing ain't gonna help. Then you got the Bob Marley album, and I believe one of the songs on there is Redemption Song. And one of the lines on that song is, emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind. Sounds like he's saying, hey, you got to free yourself from this mental slavery that Abby got you under, because right now, the thought of killing her got you in a chokehold. Now, the third album that I saw was Ja Rule's Pain is Love. The title is self-explanatory. So it sounds like the writers are trying to tap into what Ja Rule would say at this moment, despite what Dave Chappelle had to say back in the day.
You think when bad shit happens to me, I'll be in the crib like, oh my God, this is terrible. Could somebody please find Ja Rule, get hold of this motherfucker so I can make sense of all this. Where is Ja?
That's just me and how my mind thinks. But anyway, let's get back on track. So Elle went upstairs and she found a really nice guitar in great condition. And she started playing Take On Me. She sounded pretty good, actually. I was like, okay, Elle, I see you. And then Dina comes upstairs and starts listening to her and she gets caught up in her rapture. Dina was all emotional. And I was like, now see, Elle, this is that cheat code to get the girl. And Dina was like, you've gotten pretty good. And Elle was like, well, you know, Joel was a good teacher. So they kind of slightly reminisced a little bit about Joel. That was kind of a cool moment for them. So the next scene, we go over to Isaac and he's in the kitchen talking to somebody. And he talked about when he was younger, he was trying to impress women, but he didn't have a lot of money. But the way that he could impress them was through the kitchen. So he could cook real good. And he said, you know, one day I'd hoped to get some of the top of the line cookware. And he said, one day I'm going to own a Moviel saucepan with lid. Now, this may be beyond my tax bracket, but every pan that I buy normally has a lid that comes with it. So maybe the money is different where they feel like you got to pay extra for a lid. That is not the lane I drive in right now, though. And while he was talking about this, I was wondering, where is he going with this conversation? And then he finally arrived at his point. And so he's messing around with the Moviel saucepan and he has it on the stove. And he was like, it's made out of copper, and it heats up really well, but it doesn't retain the heat quite like cast iron, which makes it inferior for interrogation. So I was like, I guess he's not making an omelet anytime soon. And then the camera pans around and it's a man just sitting on the floor, butt bald naked. Buddy was filthy. He looked like he had been through it. Found out he was part of the Arm & Hammer crew. They're actually known as Scars. I didn't know that till this episode. Side note, I like this camera angle. It sort of tells you in a nuanced way that he's talking to somebody that's on the floor and it's not somebody that's on his level in general. At least that's how that makes me feel. Now, Isaac was using that Moviel to find out where's the next Scar attack. And the Scar man wasn't budging on the information. He was like, she's going to protect me. He was talking about the Prophet. And Isaac didn't care anything about that. He was just trying to figure out what the next move was. And the Scar eventually said, y'all are going to lose because every day more of your wolves are getting to know her and they want to become us. But none of us are flipping sides like Freeway. So Isaac eventually grew more frustrated with him and ended up taking him out. So then it's nighttime and you see Elle and Dina, they're looking outside of this building and they're trying to find an entry point. So they find an entry point at this window on the second floor. Hey, we got to take a quick sidebar. The apocalypse ain't no joke. If The Last of Us is teaching me a lesson, it's that you got to be in pretty good shape to survive the apocalypse. All this walking and climbing is crazy. So they walk in a room and several bodies are just hanging. And they've been gutted. It's just a real gruesome scene. Found out this is the work of the Scars. And Dina said one of my favorite lines, what the is wrong with Seattle? So they found a body that had a walkie and they tried to leave, but the wolves showed up quickly, so they had to hide. And Ellie made it upstairs, but then one of the soldiers came upstairs and she had to jump him. And then another soldier came from the opposite direction and was getting ready to shoot Ellie, but then Dina got the drop on him. Now, once she took out that soldier, they knew they were going to have to move pretty fast. So she had to shoot out the window, and then they climbed out in the rain and slid down the fire escape. But the wolves were hot on their trail. So they eventually run to this transit tunnel and they open the door and there's a whole bunch of rubble just covering the entrance. And Dina was like, well, Elle, we're small enough to get through. They are not. So they crawled through that small space and the wolves tried to, but they realized they couldn't fit. But what they did do is call for backup and tell people where to go. So Ellie and Dina are in the transit tunnel and they're like, ooh, do you think this place is going to collapse on us? And they were like, we don't really want to find out. So they're trying to figure out how to get out of there. But they couldn't do that because the backup wolf pack showed up just in time to make them hide. And when the wolf pack hit the scene, they weren't too loud, but they made a little bit too much noise. They had the light shining. They were throwing flares. They were doing just enough to get attention. And then underneath one of these cars, you see some antennas pop up in the light of a flare. So then all of a sudden you start hearing some clicking and then you start hearing some screeching. And one of the wolves was like, man, I thought it was supposed to be empty down here. And then Dina was doing her thing where she likes to count how many are there. And then she lost count because there was a rumbling. And it was sort of like the subway had like bubble guts or something. Because there was an explosion of infected that just burst onto the scene. And the Roots decided to call its babies home like it was the block party of the year. And you couldn't miss it. When I tell you everybody showed up. Some of the infected spotted Ellie and Dina and gave chase. And then Ellie and Dina jumped in one of those cars full of dead bodies. And the effective, per usual, were trying to aggressively get in the car, so they couldn't stay still for long. And they ran through to a different car and they eventually climbed out the top of it. So they ran on top of the car for a second and then they jumped down so they could climb over this fence and get up the stairs. And then they got to this old raggedy turnstile that was taking forever to turn. One of the infected made it through the gate and was on the heels of Ellie and Dina. It almost got Dina, but then Ellie saw it and stuck out her arm to get bit. Now Dina was shook and sort of frozen. Eventually she shot the infected person. Now, just like I give Dina her props for being very strategic and good with planning, I have to give Ellie her props for being very quick on her feet because Dina kept freezing up in the moment. There were a few times where Ellie had to get her to regain her focus. It was sort of reminiscent of when Joel saved Abby from the infected out by Jackson. He kept having to yell at her like, hey, let's go. And I was like, well, look at Ellie. She out here stunting like her daddy. So they finally get the turnstile to work how they need it to work. So they make it through, they fall on the floor, but the infected are still running up and they get stuck in the turnstile. Now Ellie popped up off the floor ready to go, but Dina was still frozen looking at all the infected running at them. And Ellie was like, Dina, let's go. But when she reaches her hand out, Dina is looking at her arm in amazement, done put the whole flashlight on it, her eyes on Bernie Mac. But she eventually gets up and follows behind Ellie. But that's when she started keeping her distance. And then they get outside and they see this really nice building. It's raining, and Ellie's not thinking anything about it because she's used to getting bit. But Dina doesn't know her secret, so she's standing behind Ellie like, man, I can't believe I got to take my girl out. And she was clutching that gun like pearls. So they run into that abandoned building, and Ellie is trying to figure out what the next steps are. She's moving stuff around like, okay, let's push this chair over to the door. Meanwhile, you see Dina kind of still keeping her distance. She's like, let me move away from her. And then Ellie puts that final chair in the door to make sure it's like locked, and turns around, and homegirl got the gun pointed directly at her. And Ellie's like, what the F are you doing? And then she looked down at her arm and just thought about it. She was like, oh, I forgot to tell her about this. And so she put her hands up slowly and said, hey, I need you to know a few things real quick. And Dina was like, don't make this harder than it has to be. To which Ellie replied, I'm immune. I've been bitten before and I'm still here. I'm not like these other girls. I'm like 11. I got it in me. And at first, Dina was believing her, but then she pulled that gun up real fast. And Ellie was like, hey, don't you shoot me, which she didn't. And part of the reason is because she didn't want to have to kill Ellie. 1. 2, she loves Ellie. 3, Ellie gave her an option. She said, hey, I'm going to go way over here to this chair, sit down, put a bandage on my arm. I'm going to go to sleep. And I'm going to wake up the same way that I am now, myself. And she told Dina, hey, you can keep the gun pointed at me this whole time. If I turn, shoot me. But I promise you, I'm not going to turn. So then Ellie went to sleep, but then she woke up because some water was hitting her in the face, and so she kind of jumped, and you realize that Dina still got that gun pointed at her, and Ellie had to say, hey, it was just water, don't freak out, I didn't change. And she asked Dina if she could show her the bite, and even though Dina was freaked out, she did come closer and check it out. And then out of nowhere, Dina was like, Ellie, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, hold up. Not you stepping on my moment with your old news. And this is what I assumed when she said she had to pee when she was at that store. She was throwing up a lot more. Plus, she said something about her senses. So I'm feeling like her sense of smell was heightened. So I assumed that's what it was. She was also very emotional when Ellie was singing at the music store. And then right after she shares the news of her pregnancy, she drops the lantern and the gun and they start making out. And I'm like, hold up. Wait. Y'all gotta slow down on this emotional roller coaster. There is no time to process things. I was so confused because 1, you just found out your friend was immune, and then you stepped on that news with your own news, and then y'all started making out. And on top of that, homegirl's hands was filthy. You just let her put them dirty hands down in your love below, and she still got the blood from the bite on her arm. So I'm like, y'all just not gonna be hygienic today. I'm just too germophobic for this. So then they wake up the next day, and Dina was looking at Ellie's bite marks, old and new. And Ellie brushes Dina's hair behind her ear and says, why now? To which Dina replied, I thought I lost you for a sec. And then that life that I had imagined for us where we had a kid together just went all up in smoke. And she said, I'm not even sure if you want that kind of life. And Ellie replied, with you I do. Now with a baby involved, I know Jessie gonna have something to say about that. And another part of that why now was where she talked about feeling stuck and holding fast to straightness even though she liked both men and women. But the teachings that her mom gave her was you don't like boys and girls, you like boys. So she was holding on to that even as an adult. And then Elle asked, how do you know you're pregnant though? And Dina pulled out at least 5 pregnancy tests. She took all of them. And Ellie was like, I'm gonna be a dad. And I was like, ooh girl, if you get back over to Jackson, Seth gonna have another issue. And then out of nowhere, they hear these explosions in the distance. They hear frantic call outs on the radios from the wolves. Apparently they're under attack by the Scars. And someone is yelling to take the wounded to Lake Hill. They're trying to find Nora from Abby's crew. So that piqued Ellie and Dina's interest because they knew Nora would know where Abby was. So they run up to the roof to get a better look, and then they see where Lake Hill is, and Ellie told Dina, hey, the circumstances have changed. You don't have to go if you don't want to. Literally, you can go back and I will handle this by myself. Now, Ellie, you don't have the skill set to do all of this by yourself. But Dina stuck her hand out and said, together. And so they locked hands, and that was pretty much the end of the episode. I thought it was pretty good. This is more of a building episode, but it had a lot of events that took place, and it gave a lot of information. What did y'all think of the episode? Did you enjoy it? Did I miss some stuff? Feel free to share your thoughts down below. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when I drop new content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care.